Temple and the dwarf. Paul walked through Arakeen disguised as a desert pilgrim, his face hidden beneath a stillsuit hood, blending with thousands streaming toward the temple for the evening oracle. The old Fremen razier walked beside him, a man who had recognized Paul and given the password, "We will go with the others." He could not comprehend that he was leading his god into a trap. Inside the temple, Paul saw Aliyah on the dais in her priestess robes. She drank from the melange bowl and began speaking in ritual cadences. But something was wrong. Paul could feel it through their shared blood. Aliyah was angry. She was seeing something she did not want to see, and her responses grew shorter, sharper. Then she stopped. "I have seen enough. This oracle is ended." The acolytes froze. Aliyah had never ended an oracle early, never displayed such open irritation. Paul did not wait. Racer guided him toward a side door, into a narrow street leading toward the poorer quarter. Odham's house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac. Paul approached with fatalistic calm. He had seen this moment 1,000 times. The door opened. The man who opened it was not foreseen. Paul stopped dead. In none of his 100 prescient variations had there been a dwarf. The dwarf had an ancient face on a child's body, eyes holding a feverish glitter. "I am Bijaz. You may enter." A flicker of something hope or its ghost moved through Paul's chest. His prescience had limits. The future was not entirely fixed. "What are you?" Paul asked as he crossed the threshold. "A Tleilaxu toy, a dwarf shaped in the axolotl tanks. But also something else. I am the distrans, the message you were sent to receive." He led Paul deeper into the house. "Otham is dying, which is a pity, but dying men tell the truth. The names of the traitors all recorded in me, the living distrans who should not exist." In the barren room, a figure stirred on a pallet. His face was half ruined by the splitting disease, one eye weeping endlessly while the other side remained smooth. "Usul," Otham whispered. "They want to destroy you, not kill." "Destroy. The Tleilaxu have a weapon, a ghola of the old swordmaster." "I know about the ghola. He is in my household already." Otham's clear eye widened. "Then why?" "Because I am walking the path they laid. Every step toward the trap is a step toward the only future I can bear." Bijaz giggled. "He knows, and he walks anyway. That is Muad'Dib." Paul studied the dwarf with mentat attention. "Not in the future. I cannot see you. That's why I'm here. To show you your prescience is not absolute. I have now sense I see what is happening with a clarity your spice truth cannot match. And I know what is coming. I know about the stone burner." Paul felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "It is buried beneath this house," Bijaz said. "It has been armed since before you arrived, and it is about to—" The stone burner. Bijaz's mouth was still moving, but the sound cut out. The floor bucked hard. Paul's chest hit stone he did not remember falling. Someone screamed, a single raw note swallowed by the light. Then the light ate everything. He felt his optic nerves burn out. He felt the darkness rush in. And then he felt nothing at all. The nothing was a trick. His prescient vision flooded the gap left by his physical sight. He could perceive Otham's body still on the pallet. Dory crumpled against the wall. Bijaz pressed flat to the floor with his hands over his ears, all of it arriving as positional knowledge without color or light. He could not see the world with his eyes, but every person in the street, the composition of the walls, the exact distance between his body and the door, all of it was there, complete, undeniable, vast, complete, and of Daishamal. He stood up. "My lord," a trooper's voice cracking with terror. "My eyes, I can't see." "You will adjust. Stand by the wall." Paul walked toward the door unerringly and stepped into the street. Stilgar was there. Paul felt the familiar pattern of his movement, the sharp intake of breath. The stone burner used atomic fuel, a violation of the Great Convention. I want every investigative resource tracing its origin. Which world constructed it? Which guild ship transported it? Which Fremen trader buried it? I want that information within the week. Your eyes are gone. That is obvious. Carry out my orders." Stilgar hesitated. "There is a Fremen law," he said slowly. "When a man is blinded, the tribe abandons him to the desert. I am not subject to Fremen law." "Carry out." "I am the Emperor, and I am not blind. I can see more clearly now than I ever could with eyes." Paul turned his face toward Stilgar, and the Naib recoiled. The eye sockets were empty darkness. But the voice was still the voice that commanded the largest army in human history. Send a message to Chani. Tell her I am unharmed. Tell her I am coming back to her. Bring the dwarf, Paul added. He is the human Distrans. He carries the names of the traitors. He walked on through the stunned silence of his blinded troopers. The stone burner had done something he had never been able to do himself, forced him to rely entirely on the one vision that mattered. His prescience was absolute now. No distractions, no sensory noise, no visible world to confuse the patterns. He could see everything, and he could see that the trap was not yet finished closing. The trial. Korba did not run. When the Fadakin came, he went peacefully, knowing Fremen respect a man who faces death with dignity. They brought him before Alia in the great hall. Naibs from a dozen sietches had been summoned, uneasy at a Fremen accused of treason being tried before his peers. The panegyrist Korba is accused of conspiring with the Bene Tleilaxu, the Guild, and the Bene Gesserit to assassinate the Emperor, Alia announced. The penalty is death. Korba rose. I demand to confront my accuser. It is my right, under Fremen law. The rear door opened. Paul entered, his stride as purposeful as ever. I am the accuser, he said. Korba went pale. Paul spoke to the Naibs, his voice carrying across the hall. I have seen the conspiracy, the names of the traitors, the stone burner that murdered 37 of my troopers. The panegyrists pardon it. This is not proof, Korba said, but his voice cracked. Paul turned toward him, his sightless gaze finding him unerringly. Raji Firi, the Naib 2 steps to your left, at the edge of the dais. He wears a gold wedding band containing a poison capsule. He met with guild agents in a shield wall cave 3 days ago. The guild promised him the governorship of Arrakis if I fell. Regifer's face went the color of old parchment. Stilgar stepped forward. Fremen law is clear. The penalty must be pronounced. Death, Alia said. Under Fremen law, the penalty cannot be carried out by a woman. Stilgar looked at Paul, and there was a new independence in his voice, bordering on defiance. I will carry out the execution, and I will question the panegyrist before he dies. He will give us every name, he signaled his Fadakin, who dragged Korba toward the door. When they had gone, Paul spoke quietly, still facing the remaining Naibs in the hall. Rajifiri, the gold ring, remove it. The Naib dropped it to the floor. Stilgar crushed it under his boot. We will discuss your governorship later. The programming. In the temple's lower chambers, Hate found Bijaz sitting cross-legged, humming a low, monotonous tone that made his teeth ache. You are the ghola, Bijaz said without looking up. The mentat, the weapon that walks like a man. The Tleilaxu sent me to complete your programming. The humming was not just sound. It resonated with neural pathways laid down during his tank growth. Hate felt his hands clench without his control. Bijaz leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper, intimate and terrible. The trigger phrase is simple, 3 words. She is gone. When someone speaks those words, anyone, the conditioning completes. You become the man you were, the swordmaster who loved House Atreides and hated Harkonnens with a passion beyond death. And that man will know one truth above all. Paul Atreides carries Harkonnen blood, the Baron's grandson. He will kill the Harkonnen before the Harkonnen destroys everything the swordmaster loved. Hate felt a presence stir in the depths of his consciousness. Not hate, something waiting since the axolotl tank birthed him. There is more, Bijaz said, almost gentle now. The master offers you a gift. Kill Paul, renounce his godhood, and the Tleilaxu will restore what you love. The concubine, Chani. She will die giving birth, but we have preserved her cells. We can grow a ghola of Chani improved, a Chani who will never die. She will be yours, not Paul's, yours. Hate's vision went red. The humming, the words, the impossible cruelty of the offer crashed together in his mind. You will forget this conversation, Bijaz said, until the trigger word is spoken. Then you will remember. Then you will act. Now sleep. The spice trance. Alia sat in her private chambers, the bowl of raw spice casting blue shadows across the walls. She had already taken enough to kill a normal person. She needed to see what Paul saw the vision driving him toward his doom. She dipped her finger into the bowl and brought the raw spice to her lips. The trance hit like a wave. She saw the falling moon first enormous, close enough that she could feel its heat on her face, smell the ozone crackle of atmospheric friction. And on its burning surface, Chana's face. Not screaming. Still, already gone. Then the vision shifted a single frozen gesture. Hate's hands moving toward Paul's throat, the mechanical Tleilaxu eyes reflecting atomic fire. The gesture held there, motionless, a question that had not yet been answered. Then the twins, two infants on a pallet, their eyes open, aware. The wrongness of an infant's aware gaze struck her like a physical blow. The boy's eyes tracked her movement through the vision. Preborn, like her, the weight of it pressed the air from her lungs. The ghola, Aliyah whispered. He is the crucible. Her eyes opened. Hate stood in her doorway. You took too much mélange. The medics want to administer a slap shot? No. She forced herself upright, the trance images still reeling. I needed to understand what my brother has been carrying. I saw the trap, the Tleilaxus bargain, Chani's death and the birth of the twins, and the trigger phrase that will turn you into an assassin. I saw both versions of you, the hate who serves my brother, and the original man who loved him. You are the crucible, the point where the future splits. She met his mechanical eyes. Do you love me? I do not know what love is. Then learn. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling. Chani is going to die. Paul is going to walk into the desert. The twins, the boy, is preborn, like me. They will be left without parents, and Paul's jihad will go on devouring worlds, and I cannot hold the empire together alone. I need you, Haith, or whoever you become when the trigger phrase is spoken. Look, I saw you in the vision. You were with me. You stayed. Something moved in the Gola's face, neither mentat calculation nor Tleilaxu conditioning, but something older, buried in the cells themselves. I will stay, he said, and Aliyah wept. For her brother, dying of prescience. For Chani, who would never hold her children. For the empire built on 61 billion corpses. For the twins born into a trap that had closed before their first breath. And for herself, because she had looked into the future and seen the same vision. Her brother saw a falling moon, a burning face, a door opening onto darkness, and she knew, with the certainty of the spice trance, that there was nothing she could do to stop it. The trap was already closing, the falling moon was already descending, and somewhere in the keep, Chani was going into labor. Episode 3, The Price of Prescience. Chani stood at the mouth of Sietch Tabra, one hand pressed to her belly, feeling something stir that was not the twins. She had returned to the Sietch 3 days ago, driven by a restlessness she could not name. The keep had felt like a cage, and Paul, blind Paul, who saw everything except his own children, had grown distant, speaking in riddles, his voice hollow with a grief he would not explain. She had not told him about the twins. She had assumed he knew. Prescience showed him everything. So when he spoke always of our child, singular Chani had thought it was his way of focusing the vision, narrowing the path. Now she was no longer certain. The desert wind carried the smell of spice. Somewhere beyond the shield wall, a worm was rising, its passage a distant thunder. Chani closed her eyes and let the melange-saturated air fill her lungs. And she saw. The vision came without warning, a boy, his eyes open and aware before his first breath. He looked at her from some impossible future moment, and she felt his consciousness brush hers, ancient and patient and terrifyingly familiar. The boy was aware before birth, like Aliyah. Beside him, quieter, steadying, a girl. Twins, not one child, but two. Chani opened her eyes. The desert was unchanged. But she knew now, with a certainty she could not explain, that this boy would inherit everything Paul was trying to escape. A hand touched her elbow. She turned and found the ghola, the one they called Hate, his mechanical eyes unreadable. He had been assigned to guard her while Paul attended to the endless machinery of empire. You should come inside, the ghola said. The medics say the birth could come at any hour. Why is Paul afraid for me to bear his children? The ghola's flat face showed no emotion, but something flickered in the mechanical eyes, a recognition, a pain buried deep in cellular memory. The first child was slain by Sardaukar, he said. He cannot think of a child without remembering. Chani studied him. You are no longer only a ghola, are you? Something is waking. I do not know what I am. Genuine anguish entered his voice. I have memories that do not belong to this body. I feel loyalties I cannot explain. And I feel... He stopped. You feel what? Compulsion, placed in me during the tank growth. activated by the dwarf bijaz. I do not know its trigger or its purpose, only that it is violent, and aimed at Paul. Chani felt the twins shift inside her, as if responding to the word. Cramps seized her belly, and she gasped. "Milady?" "It is time," Chani said. "Find Paul. Tell him I am not afraid. Tell him the children will live." The vigil. Paul sat in darkness outside the Siet's medical chambers, his blind face turned toward a wall he could not see. A functionary had come moments ago, knelt beside his chair, and pressed a summary slate into his hands. The latest tally. He touched the edge of the paper, feeling the raised ridges of the seal, and the number rose in his mind unbidden. 61 billion dead. The killing continued. An hour before, he had signed the Sembul Treaty, his hand moving across the page, guided by a quiet voice at his elbow. Another world pacified, another name added to the tally of planets that had bent the knee. The ghola entered. Paul felt him as a distortion in the prescient pattern, a node of uncertainty around which the future rippled. "My lord, Chani? In labor. The medics say it progresses rapidly, as we feared." Paul nodded. He had seen this. "There is something else," the ghola said. "I have discovered the compulsion placed in me by the dwarf bijaz. It is keyed to a specific phrase. When that phrase is spoken, I will lose control and attempt to kill you." Paul turned his blind face toward the speaker. "I know. You know? The dwarf told you the trigger phrase." "It will be spoken tonight, in the medical chambers, when my concubine dies giving birth. When it is spoken, you will remember everything Bijaz programmed. You will remember that I am grandson of the Baron Hatakonian, the man who murdered your duke. And you will try to kill me." The ghola stood frozen. "How long have you known?" "Since the moment Bijaz was brought into my presence. He was not in my vision, and that made him interesting. I traced his purpose backward through the prescient web. The conditioning, the trigger, the moment of crisis. 2 outcomes. You kill me, or you break free and become yourself again. Frums." Paul paused. "Chani dies in both. Then why did you walk into the trap?" "Because the trap was the only path that led to my children. Because her death is the fixed point, the falling moon I have been trying to catch for 12 years. Deviate from this path, and the jihad burns another 500 worlds instead of stopping. There is no scenario where she lives. None. I have searched every branch." The ghola said, "You are speaking to me as though I were someone else. That is what you are becoming. The memory is surfacing. You wept at Leto's tomb. You felt a friend's arm on your shoulder. You called me young master, once already the name the original man always used." Paul used a name the original had carried, a name not yet earned. "The conditioning is breaking down, Duncan. When the trigger comes, you will have a choice. Not between ghola and original, between Tleilaxu weapon and the man who died for House Atreides." A medic's assistant appeared in the doorway. "My lord, the Lady Chani is asking for you." Paul rose. His prescient vision showed him exactly where to step. "Stay close," he said to the ghola. "The moment is almost here." She is gone. The chamber was rock-walled, hung with tapestries that trapped the heat. In the center, on a pallet ringed by glow globes, Chani lay with her white robe smoothed beneath her. The medics had done what they could. The afterbirth still pooled under the pallet. The smell of blood thick in the air. Hara met Paul at the entrance. "Usul, she is right here." The ghola guided Paul's hand to the edge of the pallet. Paul knelt and touched Chani's face. It was cooling already. "The children," Paul said. His voice was level, but Hara heard the splinter behind it. "Twins," Hara said. "A boy and a girl, both healthy. Twins." The word hit him like a physical blow. In every prescient vision, every one of the 1,000 variations he had traced, there had been only one child. A single heir. He had made every calculation based on a single child, and now there were 2. "Bring them to me," Hera gestured, and a nurse placed 2 warm bundles in Paul's arms. He held them awkwardly, his blind face tilted downward. He could not see them with his eyes, but his prescient vision showed him their life patterns already diverging, splitting the future into branches he had never glimpsed. The boy was aware. Paul felt it immediately, that terrible consciousness, pre-born, awakened in the womb by the spice saturation of Chanis diet. Like Alia, this child would be born knowing everything his ancestors knew, carrying the full weight of prescience without ever having chosen it. The girl was different, still, quiet, anchoring. Leto, Paul said, for my father. And Ganima, he handed the twins back to Hara and turned to where Chani's body lay. His prescient vision was fragmenting now, overwhelmed by grief and guilt. The place where the moon fell, he had reached it at last. Sire, a new voice. Aliyah had entered the chamber, and she was not alone. Beside her stood a woman Paul recognized through prescience, the face dancer Saital, still wearing Lichna's stolen face. I brought one who wished to pay respects, Aliyah said. Her voice was strained. Something was wrong. The false Lichna stepped forward. I bring an offer from the Bene Tleilaxu. The voice shifted mid-sentence, losing the Fremen accent, becoming something older and colder. My name is Saital. You know why I am here. Paul rose. The ghola moved to his side, hand on his Christ knife. Speak, Paul said. Your concubine is dead, but the Tleilaxu can restore her. We have preserved her cells. We can grow a ghola of Chani, a ghola with all her memories, improved, perfected. She will never die. She will be yours forever. The ghola's grip tightened on his knife. Do not listen to him. The price, Paul said. You are the price. Renounce your godhead. Disband your jihad. Surrender CHOAM holdings. Walk away from the throne and take a position as Tleilaxu functionary. Let the empire dissolve into the factions that preceded it. Do this, and Chani lives. Paul was silent for a long moment. In the prescient web, he saw the branch clearly, now Chani restored. The children raised by both parents, the empire crumbling, but the killing ending. It was the peace he had always claimed to want. But he saw something else. The Tleilaxu ascendant, genetic manipulation spreading through the human universe unchecked, stagnation that would follow a humanity that never learned to govern itself, never grew beyond its dependence on oracles and gods. Billion years of comfortable slavery. There are some prices an Atreides cannot pay, Paul said. Skittle's stolen face twisted. Then your children will pay instead. He moved toward the crèche, where the twins lay. The ghola's knife was out, but Skytail was faster than any human shape had a right to be. His hand closed on the edge of the crèche, and Paul saw, not through prescience, not through the vision he had trusted and hated for 12 years. He saw through the eyes of his infant son. The boy's consciousness touched his, a bridge across the gap left by burned-out optic nerves, and Paul perceived the chamber Skytale's hand on the crèche, alias frozen horror, the ghola's knife rising, the twins' faces, calm and aware. My eyes, father, the child's thought shape shimmered. Paul's hand moved without conscious direction. The Christ knife, still wet with the water of his bond with Chani, left his belt. His arm described the arc he had trained into it across 10,000 practice sessions. The blade crossed the chamber in a silver flash and buried itself in Skytle's right eye. The face dancer toppled without a sound. Paul stood over the body. His prescient vision had returned, overlaying the sight line from his son's eyes, and for one moment he perceived every branch fanning outward from this single act. Then the prescient web dissolved. He was a blind man in a room full of the dead and the living, and for the first time in 12 years, he could not see what came next. She is gone, he said. The awakening. The words hit the ghola like a wave of ice water. He remembered everything. He remembered the Sardaukar blade that had killed him. He remembered the cold dark of the axolotl tank, the voices whispering programming into his growing cells. He remembered the moment of awakening as the ghola hate, the mentat training, the Zen philosophy, the metal eyes that showed him a world without warmth. And he remembered Paul, not the Emperor Muad'Dib, but the young master, the boy he had trained in the sword arts on Caladan, the Duke's son who had looked at him with hero worship and asked to hear stories of the fighting on Druman. He also remembered what Bihaz had told him. Paul Atreides, grandson of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, the man who had destroyed House Atreides, the monster whose genetic legacy flowed in Paul's own blood. The ghola who had been hate remembered everything, the Sardaukar blade, the cold dark of the tank, the boy on Caladan asking for sword lessons and became Duncan Idaho again. His hand found his Christ knife, and then he looked at Paul. The blind emperor stood over Chani's body, his empty eye sockets leaking tears giving water to the dead, as the Fremen said. He was not a Harkonnen. He was not the Kwisatz Haderach. He was not the terrible god of the jihad. He was a man who had just lost the woman he loved, holding two children he had never expected, standing in a trap he had walked into with open eyes, because it was the only path that led to something he valued more than his life. Duncan sheathed his knife. "Paul," he said, "I am here." Paul turned toward the voice. "Duncan Idaho." The same. The trigger phrase was spoken. "You remember the Harkonian blood." "Why didn't you kill me?" "Because you are not your grandfather. Because the Duke raised you. Because in the tank, before the Tleilaxu conditioning took hold, I remembered one thing clearly. A boy on Caladan who asked me to teach him the sword, and who listened when I told him that loyalty was not a calculation but a choice." Paul reached out until his hand found Duncan's shoulder. "Welcome back, old friend." The desert walk. The executions were Stilgar's doing. Paul had given the order, execute the conspirators, all of them, but he had specifically exempted the Reverend Mother Mohiam. The Bene Gesserit had uses. Their genetic knowledge would be needed in the generations to come. Let the old witch live out her days under guard. Stilgar had seen something Paul's prescience had not. He had seen the faces of the Naibs when they learned that the conspiracy reached into the highest ranks of the Quizzerat. He had seen the doubt, the fear, the slow erosion of the myth that held the Empire together. Mohiam knew too much. She knew about the Harkonnen blood, she knew about the Kwisatz Haderach program and its failures. She knew the secret histories that could be used to delegitimize every Atreides who ever sat a throne. So Stilgar killed her. He did it himself with a Kreis knife, in the prison cell where she had waited. When the news reached Paul, the blind emperor turned his face toward the wall and said nothing. His prescient web had dissolved. He could no longer see whether this was the right choice or the wrong one. Korba died too, and Edric the steersman and the dwarf Bajas Paul had given that order himself, speaking in the Atreides battle tongue so that no one could countermand it. The Tleilaxu had offered him Chani's ghola, and as long as Bijaz lived, that temptation would exist. Some prices an Atreides could not pay, but some temptations an Atreides could not resist forever. Trigia. When the last conspirator was dead, Paul summoned his household to the great hall. Alia came, her eyes still red from the spice trance that had shown her the full scope of the tragedy. Duncan Idaho came, fully himself now. The ghola shell cracked open to reveal the man who had been Paul's teacher and friend since childhood. Stilgar came, his hands still bloody, his face set in the stubborn lines of a Naib who had done what needed doing. And the Princess Irulan came, the conspirator, the poisoner who had kept Chani barren for years, and she stood before them with tears streaming down her face, claiming she had loved Paul all along. Paul faced them, his empty eye sockets turned toward some point beyond the walls. "The Empire is yours," he said. "Alia will serve as regent until the children come of age. Duncan will command the military. Stilgar will govern Arrakis. Irulan," he paused, "Irulan will teach my children. You cannot abdicate," Alia said. The Jihad will continue. It has its own momentum. Killing me will not stop it. Saving me will not stop it. The Jihad is a mental epidemic that used me, not a tool I controlled. It will burn until it burns out. That is the one thing my prescience showed me clearly." He turned toward the door. The desert lay beyond the deep desert, the place where no still suit could preserve a blind man for long. "Fremen law requires that the blind be abandoned to the sand," Paul said. "I am their emperor. I will follow their law." "No," Duncan said, stepping forward. "Paul, you cannot." "I can see now, Duncan. For the first time in 12 years, I cannot see the future. And that means I am free." He touched Duncan's arm. "Take care of my children, take care of Alia, and remember you are Duncan Idaho. You chose to be him. That choice is worth more than any Tleilaxu conditioning." He walked into the desert. The sand swallowed him within 20 paces. The wind erased his footprints within the hour. By nightfall, the worm had come and gone, and there was nothing left of the man who had been Muad'Dib, the emperor of the known universe, the killer of 61 billion, except a legend that would outlast the empire itself. The aftermath. Duncan Idaho stood at the mouth of the Sietch, watching the desert where Paul had vanished. His Mentat training supplied him with probabilities: death by exposure, death by worm, death by dehydration, but something deeper, something that had survived the axolotl tank and the Tleilaxu programming, told him that Paul Atreides was not dead. Gone, yes, but not dead. The Fremen said that Muad'Dib had entered the Ru world, the Alam al-Mithil where all possible futures existed. They said he wandered there still, an oracle without eyes, guiding his people from beyond the veil of time. It was the kind of myth that built religions, and Duncan knew Paul would have hated it. Aaliyah found him there as the first moon rose. "They are saying I must take the regency," she said. "Stilgar has already begun issuing orders in my name. Irulin is in the nursery with the twins, teaching them Bene Gesserit histories. She says she loved Paul. She says she wants to atone." "Do you believe her?" "I believe she loved him. I believe she poisoned Chani anyway. The two are not mutually exclusive." Her voice cracked. "I saw all of this in the spice trance. The falling moon, the twins, Paul walking into the sand, you standing here, waiting for me. I saw that you would stay. I gave Paul my word. Is that why you're staying? Your word?" Duncan turned to face her. The mechanical eyes glinted in the moonlight Tleilaxu eyes, but the vision behind them was entirely his own now. "I am staying because I remember what it was to die for House Atreides. I remember the Duke's last command. Protect my son. Protect his family. I failed the first time, on the Sardaukar blades. I will not fail again." Aaliyah took his hand. Her fingers were cold, still trembling with the after effects of the spice trance and the grief and the terrible clarity of Paul's final vision. "What do we do now? Raise his children. Keep his empire from collapsing. Wait to see whether the jihad burns itself out or consumes everything. A small task then." Duncan almost smiled. "He never gave us easy ones." They stood together in the moonlight, the desert wind carrying the smell of spice and the distant rumble of a worm. Somewhere deep in the sand, a blind man walked alone through the darkness, his face turned toward a future he could finally not see, and the myth of his passing was already rising from the desert like heat shimmer. A story that would outlast every empire, every jihad, every child born to carry his name. Paul walked into the desert blind, and the myth of Muad'Dib rose from the sand behind him. That is where the story leaves us. Aaliyah and Duncan Idaho standing in moonlight, two preborn twins in the nursery, a jihad that no longer needs its messiah to keep burning. The emotional residue is not closure, but a specific kind of grief. The man who saw everything could not change anything, and his freedom cost more than his life. That discomfort is not a bug. Frank Herbert wrote Dune Messiah precisely to produce it. Herbert spent 6 years researching Dune. The sequel took far less time, not because it was rushed, but because he had always intended the first 3 novels as a single continuous argument about the charismatic leader as social catastrophe. Dune Messiah appeared in 1969, 4 years after Dune, serialized in Galaxy magazine before its hardcover release. What looked like a commercial follow-up was structurally the second movement of a long work. And the novel's most famous statistic, 61 billion dead, 90 planets sterilized, was not world-building flavor. Herbert put that number on the page because readers had written him letters after Dune asking for more adventures where Paul triumphed. They wanted the hero they had been promised. Herbert's response was a novel where the hero discovers that prescience is not power, but paralysis, that seeing every possible future does not let you choose among them, only watch yourself walk toward the one you cannot bear. This is not cynicism, it is an ecological argument applied to politics. Herbert believed centralized power concentrates not just decision-making, but also the excuses people make for its consequences. The jihad, Paul tells Stilgar, was never something he controlled. It was a mental epidemic that used him. The person at the top becomes the explanation the system requires, not its cause. Footnote. Herbert had studied the dynamics of charismatic movements. Religious, political, military, and Messiah is his formal statement that the Superman is not the solution to history's problems. He is one of them. The novel's reputation has risen with decades of hindsight. At publication, many readers were disappointed by its scale. Instead of epic battles, political interiors, a palace tragedy of a man trapped in rooms while his legend devoured worlds. But what once read as a diminished sequel now reads as the pivot where the Dune cycle declares its real subject. The hero is the disaster. The oracle is the blindest man in the room. The desert that gave Paul his power is the only place where he can finally stop seeing the future. Herbert never intended Paul Atreides as a model. He intended him as a warning. And the warning's sharpest edge is that Paul knows it too, has always known it, and walks the path anyway, because every alternative he can see is worse. That is the price of prescience in a universe that does not care whether its prophets are willing. The myth outlasts the man, the killing continues, and the children born into the trap must find their own way through it.